Hey listeners, alright, so welcome to the Witching Hour. The purpose of the Witching Hour is really to discuss various aspects of witchcraft, namely contemporary issues, misconceptions, and practices with some insights into the life of the contemporary magical community. Tonight's episode, the first, is going to be sort of a simple one. Before we can really start talking about witchcraft, we need to clear up some terms that get thrown around a lot by both members of the community and people who haven't had much experience with it. Obviously, it is important to define the word witch, but this really is one of the hardest things to define. Witch probably means about 7 different things to different people in different places at different times, and there isn't really any way to pull all of those ideas into one figure. Almost every culture has some kind of witch or magician. There's the Bokor of Haiti, the shamans of Siberia, the brujas of Mexico, the Polish whisperers, and Molfar, all of which most North Americans would see and think, oh, it's a witch. In general, what connects these people is a practice of magic, at the very least, and when it gets more complicated, we're just going to have to specify. So remember that witchcraft is a craft with a result-based function like any metal or woodcraft. It is not a religion. Very important distinction. But of course, the word itself has its origins, even though it's hard to define. And for that, we look to the Old English word Vika. Since the word witch, therefore, comes from British and Germanic areas, it will be these Western practices we focus on more than others while discussing witchcraft on this show. Magic isn't as localized as we often think. There's not Germanic magic, then English magic, Italian, Indian, Nigerian magic. Folk magic has qualities all over the world that connect and relate in surprising ways, especially when you start looking at the practices of the different people. As folk magic is the magic of the lower classes, it isn't as restricted by country borders and shores, etc. It has long been a part of the elite classes as well, magic, that is, especially in the Western world. The upper class magic of alchemists and courtmen also has similarities across Europe, as the academic system transcended nationalism as well as magic did. But what is magic? Again, you ask 10 different witches and you'll get 40 different answers, but the most famous might be the definition provided by the occultist Aleister Crowley in his book Magic in Theory and Practice. And that was published in 1929. He says that magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Now, essentially, changing the world to match your will. And again, he states here that it is both an art and a science, which is very important because as we're trying to get a grasp on what exactly it is, it's important not to think of it as too factual or too fluid. It's quite liminal in that respect. So paganism is something that gets confused with witchcraft way too often, especially in the larger community. The Latin word paganus means of the countryside, like the hillbilly life, backwoods yokels, etc. But over time, this sort of a classist slur grew wider, and in the modern day, it tends to be Well, it tends to refer to any religion or tradition with polytheistic or magical theology. And the older, the better. When you stop to think about it, you see that this idea covers a lot of people. So it has become this umbrella term. And since so many magic users in the modern day yearn for this older pagan faith, a lot of people think all witches are pagans, when in reality most medieval European witches were Christian, and a great amount of modern witches everywhere still are. Witches so often practice magic on the edge of a larger religious tradition, which is how you get these folk magicians in every corner of the world that don't have an overarching tradition, because they're working from their own localized points, moralistically, theologically, spiritually, and their traditions develop from that, but for some reason they develop with practices that are almost global in their similarities. So you have magic that is used to create change, you have paganism, which is the umbrella term that can describe many religions and traditions, and finally witches, who practice magic but defy all other definition and titles as they work their spells all around the world.
1, 2, 3, 4. Dance, dance, snow. dancing. Could you please turn to honey? Could you please turn to morning? Could you please turn tomorrow and turn our dance into ice? So freeze our dance under lakes and turn our dance into ice. So freeze our dance under lakes and freeze our dance into snow. Oh, angel pillows, freeze our dance into snow. Oh, angel pillows, freezing our dance into snow. Angel pillows.
Welcome back. That was Wizard Flurry Home by Mary Sue. So, as you guys are getting to hear a lot of information from me over the next few months, I think it's important that you know a bit of my background as a witch to understand where I'm coming from, especially any of you out there who have some magical background or background in religious history, etc. So, my interest in witches started from a very young age. It started with media, actually, The Wizard of Oz. I used to wear this wicked witch costume every day for years, the dress and everything. When I was 12, the mother of a friend took us on a hike in the woods, and as we were walking around, we started talking about history, religions, gods, symbolism, magic. Over months, she brought me into a sort of tradition of Gnostic Hermeticism, which I won't get into right now. And that was sort of my first introduction to the real world of magic rather than the Hollywood world, and my first glimpse of spirituality outside of an Episcopalian church as well. We had a private initiation ceremony that lasted about a day and was a wonderful experience. The most important thing about my introduction to Hermeticism was that it sparked my research into witchcraft. I was about 13 when I started trying to find answers and information on the subject, and I started consciously doing my own spells, although I had always done spells in some way or other, as I think many of us do, just without realizing it was magic, or knowing what to call it at least. Of course, when I started looking at witchcraft, the first sources I ran into were simple texts on Neo-Wicca, as that's the first thing anyone new will run into on the internet. I'm planning to go into Neo-Wicca and Wicca in a future episode soon, because it's a lot of material to cover. After about a year, I had scoured pretty much all I could on Neo-Wicca, and quickly I got bored. So with the help of the internet and a wonderful metaphysical store called the Venus Moon in Washington State, I began to explore my options, and I ran into traditional witchcraft about 3 years ago. After a long experimentation and a lot of research and trying out different practices and paths, and I've been focusing my research and practices toward more academically supported texts and traditions. I've done a lot of my research on British paganism, magic, and witchcraft, with a good amount of study in Greco-Roman and Eastern European practices as well. Lately, I've been really focusing on documents from the European witch trials and working on the connections between the witch hunts and folkloric magic. Alright, so on some episodes, I'm going to be giving you instructions on how to perform certain spells. Some will be ones I have written, some will be from authors I respect, and some will be from texts on magical practices from the past few hundred years. So, this first spell is a spell for absolution, which I think will be helpful for all of us after the crazy hurly-burly of last semester. I think it was kind of a dark winter for everybody. So it's a spell for absolution, and it comes from the Crone's Book of Magical Words by Valerie Worth, who's one of my favorite authors. Alright, so these are her words. In a shaded room burn candles 3, whose wax is black as ebony. Let incense cloud and thicken the air, then write these words against despair. Dolor, fumosus, animus, atratus, in lictu sum, signo signum. Burn the paper and powder its ash in a shallow bowl of polished brass. Cover your hands with this dark dust, and your future will be cleansed. Your past will be cleansed, and your future blessed. Sorry, I messed up the end a little bit there. Anyway, and she actually wasn't a witch herself, or so it is said. She was just a poet who really liked folklore. And so wrote these wonderfully useful, practical, magical texts, although it's said that she herself did not practice. And there's actually a safe space where you can cast this spell on campus without getting kicked out of your dorm room for violating fire safety. The spiritual space on campus underneath Bates Dining Hall allows you to burn registered candles on pre-planned days. So if you want to get some absolution, just contact Elisa Ortiz and she will tell you more about how to register your candles. All right, well, it was quite a short episode, but that's going to be all for tonight, folks. So have a safe night, and thanks for listening to The Witching Hour.